Hello to you all and welcome to another episode of my astrology podcast. Tonight I have a special guest with me, the one of a kind in the art of astrology, which all of you who are studying this art came across in his brilliant teachings. I have with me the astrologer John Frawley. John, welcome to the Astrology Without Sugar podcast.
Oh, thank you, Dino. Very nice to be here.
As I told you before, back in 2012, for the first time, I became familiar with the art of horary astrology, and that was really an incredible discovery for me, since I was so into natal astrology and birth charts. And then I got your book, Horary Astrology textbook, and since then I fell in love with this art. So I want to thank you and to say that I'm really honored to have a chance to speak with you today.
Oh, thank you. Very kind words. I'm glad you appreciate the work I've done.
Definitely.
Horary is a remarkable thing. It's by far the most useful kind of astrology, much more than birth charts. Birth charts are fascinating, but trying to work out what's going on in a birth chart, because every planet has so many different roles it can play. So you really need to know what's going on in the life in order to understand what's happening in the birth chart at that time.
Yes. I think that maybe horary astrology has most impact on these precise things and precise answers that clients want to know.
Yes, it's very direct, straight to the point. That's what you want to talk about. Okay, that's what the chart's telling us.
That's right. Okay, can you tell us something about your beginnings in the study of horary astrology?
Oh, I can't remember when it was. It was quite young, I think still in my teens. And I'd been interested in natal astrology and started teaching myself how to draw up charts and things, which this was back in ancient days, long before computers came along. You had to calculate it all yourself. And I can't remember exactly how I first came across horary astrology, but it sounded interesting. I pursued it more, and I went to some classes with somebody who was teaching it, and that moved on to studying with somebody else, and claimed to be teaching from the work of William Lilly. And studying with her was a rather frustrating experience. Her acquaintance with William Lilly was extremely limited. I don't think she'd ever actually read his book, more than a few pages of it, but she claimed to be teaching from it. But nonetheless, it's struggling and battling against that got me more and more interested in it, and studying Lilly myself.
In your books, I see a lot of practice, your personal practice, because every time you speak about something, you give an example which is firmly attached to the reality. So the reader can logically, let's say, see how does the planet works, or anything related with the chart.
Yes, that's a marvelous thing about horary. It's so logical. I mean, so much of what people in the world of astrology do is just imposing their mental pictures onto the person whose chart they're supposed to be reading. Whereas horary is not. It's directly logical, based on sound structure in the chart. And it's
yes, and marvelously direct and precise.
Yes, the precision. For example, with lost object questions, which are just remarkable. The fact that the chart can tell you exactly where this lost object is. Okay, it's in your home office on the floor just by the door.
And what about timing in horary?
That can be very precise as well. If a precise timing is needed, it can be exact.
In your books, you often mention William Lilly's teachings, and when it comes to horary, although I think that you went a step forward and did a lot of practical changes in the way that Lilly was doing it. How much did the practice change since the time of Lilly?
Well, there's a lot. There's a difficult thing. This idea of traditional astrologers, because we're doing stuff which people were doing a few hundred years ago. And if you're this common idea that if you're a traditional astrologer, you regard everything in these old books as being wonderful. But it isn't. There's something I impress on my students. There's a lot of rubbish in the old books too, including Lily's book. There's a lot of stuff which is there just to make sure that the astrologer can always find something in the chart to point to in order to tell the client exactly what the client wants to hear, for example. And there's also things that Lily didn't understand, like the way receptions work. And so because of that, he was never able to understand what people think about each other or feel about each other. And so because of that, he had no option but to accept what the client told him, which is often not true. But underneath all that, despite the, as I say, a lot of nonsense in these old books, there is a sound structure underneath it all on which we can build.
I'm impressed. When was the moment when you saw that the bad practice of William Lilly? Is that a lot of experience, a lot of other readings?
Well, not really. It's quite early on in my reading of him, because Lilly, I think Lilly's aim, I don't think he really expected anyone to read his book, Christian Astrology. I think his aim, he just wanted to write a very big book, because if he wrote a very big book, people would think, he's the master. And so they would regard him as the one they need to consult. And particularly important, they would regard his political and religious predictions as the ones to follow. And that was important to Lilly, because that was where most of his income came from. At the time when William Lilly was the best-selling author in England for several years. And that's not just the best-selling astrological author, that's the best-selling author of any kind, with his political and religious predictions, which were based completely on his own political and religious prejudices, but using astrology to back them up. And so, because he just wanted to write a very big book, there's so much stuff thrown in just to fill up a few more pages. And there's a lot of stuff, on one page which just completely contradicts what he says on another page. And a lot of stuff which is put in which is just completely and very obviously unsound, makes no sense. But there is, as I say, a structure there. There's a good deal of stuff that does make sense too.
Yes, and you, I don't know, get over all of those teachings. You learned them. You had the chance to meet with his conclusions, and then you take only the integral, most important parts, and you put it in your practice on some, let's say, more nowadays way.
Well, I suppose so. It's not elaborated as much as Lilly does, but then again, I'm not trying to write a big book. And also it's much more to the point. I mean, there were things, completely unnecessary things that Lilly throws into his judgments. Like almost all of his chart example judgments that he gives a physical description of the person who's asking the question based on what the chart shows. But there is no reason that the chart needs to give a physical description of the person who's asking the question.
That's right.
And he often gives a physical description of whoever it is the person's asking about. But it's interesting that the one chart where he doesn't do that is his question is asking about what kind of death the Archbishop is going to die, because the Archbishop was on trial for treason. And he doesn't give a physical description of the Archbishop there. And there's a reason for that, which is that, as everybody knew, the Archbishop was unusually short. There's a painting of the Archbishop standing next to his dog, and he's only just a tiny little bit taller than his dog was. But there's nothing in the chart that you can point to show that he was very short, and so he doesn't give you a physical description of him. And that judgment, for example, is pure political propaganda by Lilly. Is just pushing his own political beliefs, not trying to judge what's actually the chart's telling us. And he does a lot of that because these were difficult times, both for politics and religion in England, big struggles going on. And the reason he became such an important and therefore high earner on the subject was because he was making big forecasts on this. And the reasons for very violent differences of opinion between him and some other astrologers were based on their religious and political differences, on the different sides of the fence.
I've read somewhere, I don't know if that is true, that he predicted a big fire that was in London, I think, or somewhere in England.
In London, yes, he claims to have done. Yes, and it's a distant memory of its predictions. From what I remember, I think he rather remade the chart afterwards. But it's.
Okay, can you tell us something more about the question itself and how important it is to be clear with the intention about what someone is asking?
Yes, the question does need to be clearly stated to make it clear what the person is asking, not vague. If it's vague, the astrologer inevitably just fills in his own assumptions about the thing. It needs to be directly to the point as well, what you're asking about.
The marvelous example for that was in the sports astrology, where you give the example when someone asks, will my team win? But if he's asking that only because of the money, then that is not the question of sports astrology, but the questions about money or income.
Yes, and also on that same basis, that you need to be quite clear about, will my team win? Well, are they really your team? Do you really support them?
That's right. That is why I always say that horary astrology is alive. It's totally in the balance with the moment and with of course, the universe.
Yes, I had a student sent me a chart recently. Somebody had asked her a question about football match. Will Spain win? And she said, okay, he supports Spain. I thought, okay, well, is he Spanish? No. Well, that doesn't mean that you've got no basis on which to judge the chart, just a preference to one, because you've got no reason to assign Spain to this house and the enemy to the other house, unless you're really seeing it as us against them. And the outcome, if they win or if they lose, are you going to say we won or we lost, or are you going to say they won and they lost? And
that's right.
If you're not Spanish, it's most unlikely you're going to say we won. So you can't give them the first house in the chart on the basis of us against the enemy, the seventh. You've got no basis for assigning houses, so you can't judge the question if the person's got no real interest. Unless it is a matter of, will I make money by betting on Spain, which, as you just said, is not about football, it's about making money. So you have got a sound basis for that one.
And I find that really troubling in working with the clients, because usually the question is not direct. So and even sometimes it becomes clear. We can see even from the horary chart, maybe it's indicating to something else.
Yeah.
What about okay, we talked about the question, but before interpreting the question and the chart, there are a few rules that we follow regarding the considerations before judgment. And can you tell us how important this is?
Absolutely not important at all. These considerations before judgment, if they were applied strictly, they would rule out almost every chart. And there are a lot more of them in different books just to make sure that there is a reason for not judging every chart. And it's just to give the astrologer a reason for not judging charts that are likely to cause him problems by giving the answer that the client doesn't want, especially if he was working for somebody powerful. You know, if you're the king's astrologer, and the king says to you, oh, you know, does the princess love me? You think, are you mad? Of course she doesn't. But you tell him that, well, you're going to be in prison or executed. So you need to, oh, no, sorry, it's Saturn's in the 7th house. I can't judge that. But for example, just the idea that you can't judge a chart if the ascendant is in the first or last 3 degrees of any sign. That rules out 20% of all charts. And as I say, there's other things, that Saturn in the 7th house, okay, that's 1 in 12 of all charts, and so on and so on. And there's no reason at all any of these things, because the important point is that astrology does not stop working, which is what the use of these considerations assume. Oh no, astrology is just not working at the moment, can't use it. It's not, as the saying goes, it's as above, so below. It's not as above as sometimes down below.
So the universe says that we can consult it at any time. Yes. We only need to be direct with our intention.
Yeah. Now, not every question can be answered. But it's not because the astrology is failing, it's because the question is not clear. Open-ended questions, for instance, you know, which country should I move to? Well, you know, how many countries are there in the world? There's no possible way the chart can, or the astrologer can guess. If it's a case of, should I stay in the country where I am, or should I move to the country where I grew up with my parents? Okay, we've got a basis for judging the chart. The open-ended, or what is my vocation? Particularly in this modern world of computers and things, your vocation is quite possibly something I've never even heard of, and so I can't possibly see it in the chart. On the other hand, if you're asking,
that's right,
have I got a future doing this particular job? Well, yes, that can be judged.
Yes, definitely. Well, it's the problem that I mentioned at the beginning. The directness in the intention is something that is needed in order to give a direct question, so that can be interpreted. It's incredible how receptions between the planets have an impact in giving the correct answer, and they are always involved in almost every subject of the horary. Can planets really love each other?
Well, receptions work in different ways depending on the context of the question. You know, the fact that, you know, my planet is in the sign or exaltation of your planet. Okay, in some questions, the relevant way of looking at this is in terms of love. In other questions, it's in terms of who's got power over whom. Other things, the context is just so important in the chart.
And where I find receptions nearly perfect working is definitely in love charts, but in court processes, litigations, and other things. I'm a lawyer, so it's interesting for me as well because of that. So receptions do work, and we have to use them in interpreting the chart.
Yes, and particularly in questions about, you know, love issues. They show us the mixture of feelings that are going on in the chart, because you know, people often assume that it's going to be really clear you totally love this other person and you've got no negative feelings for them. But we're not Walt Disney characters, cartoon characters. We're human beings, and even in the most loving relationship, there's going to be some kind of negativity somewhere, because we're human. And the chart shows us this mix of that. Okay, you love the person in this way, but that way you're not quite so keen on them, or you wish they were giving you more in that way.
Yes, so it's never one state or one emotion. Okay. when it comes to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in horary chart, do we use them in interpreting?
Oh yes, yes, they can be very relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Some important points. They do not rule signs, as modern astrologers claim, because that completely tears apart the whole structure of which sign rulership is based.
Mm-hmm.
But they do have their importances. They're sort of midway between the fixed stars and the conventional planets, and their use is more limited, but they can be very relevant sometimes, and we must read their meanings according to what they are in myth. Uranus is the sky god who gives us all these wonderful dreams of what can happen, but these dreams can never come true. Which is why, and these wonderful dreams of all things that are possible, that's why Uranus is connected with computers for a start, because of all these wonderful things they offer. And it's often associated with divorce and things, because this is our realization that, oh no, the dream didn't come true. But the dream, it's interesting, the chart somebody showed me recently, a question about, will I get this job? And the person thought this job was going to be absolutely wonderful. And the significator, it was conjunct Uranus, but it's also conjunct the fixed star Caput Algol. And Uranus is always, impossible dreams, which is what she had about this wonderful, wonderful job. But Caput Algol, is a loud warning, don't lose your head. And so being conjunct Uranus at the same time as a warning, don't get carried away by these big dreams. And we could see from what happened in the chart that if she got this job, there were going to be big problems, because her planet immediately changed sign and lost a huge amount of dignity. And the planet signifying the job immediately changed sign and lost all interest in her. And so it's clear from the chart that if she got this job, she was not going to be happy there. But this combination of Uranus and Algol was giving the big warning, no, don't pursue it. Then Neptune is, there's this idea common in the modern world that Neptune is all about peace and tranquility. Neptune is the god of the ocean, and the one thing the ocean is never is peaceful and tranquil. Neptune, I think a better name for Neptune is what Homer called him, the earth shaker. Because Neptune sent the earthquakes that destroyed the city of Troy, this powerful sea god, and the challenge of sailing across this ocean in early stories without being destroyed. And so bumping into Neptune in the chart is usually a rather painful experience, and can sometimes be very literal. Will I get together with this girl I love? And my planet can't conjunct her planet because Neptune gets in the way. Well, no, in fact, she lives on that side of the ocean, you live on this side, and neither of you are going to make the move across the ocean. And Pluto, again, Pluto is often seen as a really nasty person, which he isn't. Pluto is just this guy who lives under the earth, and he's only ever left his home on one occasion. And when he looked up through his skylight, he saw this beautiful girl walking across the meadows. And so he went out, grabbed her and carried her back to be his wife. And this is often portrayed as a horrible thing, but she's perfectly happy living down there with him. And every year she comes up to Earth for a few months to do her shopping and have her hair done and things. But she was perfectly happy to go back and join him. And so the idea with Pluto is about this containment under the earth, the not leaving. It often comes up in charts when people are asking about retirement homes, things like that. Pluto relevant. And one particularly clear example, just when COVID was starting, somebody asked this chart, will I be able to make this journey across Europe for my intended summer vacation? Because there's fears that it wasn't going to be possible. And in the charts, well, his planet was applying to aspect the ruler of the ninth house, which rules long journeys. Yes, you can make the journey. But before it did that, his planet made a conjunction with Pluto. No, you're not going anywhere. You're staying where you are. And the next day, lockdown was announced. All the airports were closed, and no, you cannot make the journey. So things like that, it can be relevant in that way. Very relevant. Only by conjunction or opposition, the outer planets, and only if it's obvious that they're involved in the chart. Don't have to go trying to drag them in. I never think, oh yeah, what's Neptune got to say about this situation? But if there's an immediate aspect with it, well, yes, it can be important, or if it's right on a relevant house cusp.
Yes, and you say the same for the part of fortune, I think. So we will never look into the chart what is part of fortune doing, only if it's referring to something important.
Yes, only if it's clear. And the important point about the part of fortune is often misunderstanding because of this word fortune. People think it often associated with having lots of money. But it's not. It's not that kind of fortune. It's the goddess Fortuna who rules the random ups and downs of our life. And part of fortune is much more about what we haven't got than what we have got. It's the lunar part, and the moon is always missing something. And so I think a better name for the part of fortune is the part of hunger. It can be relevant if it's like conjunct one of the relevant significators. Okay, that's what I hunger for. But the fortune in the sense of having plenty, that's the solar part, not the lunar part, part of abundance. But the parts are very, very important in natal astrology, but rarely that significant in horary astrology.
And what about natal astrology and part of fortune?
Well, as I say, it's this part of hunger, but it depends what he's doing, because anything in a natal chart is a very complex thing. The seven key planetary parts can be very, very important.
Instead of interpreting the natal chart, can we use only horary astrology for a client who is having precise and clear questions?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. The natal chart is, well, in the first place, judging a natal chart always involves a good deal of work and a good deal of the astrologer's time, and therefore is going to be expensive for the client. So horary is much more quick and simple. And, horary judgment never takes that long and can be just done at a glance. Sometimes some charts are so clear.
Yes, and in interpreting natal charts, we can't give answer on some questions who are definitely precise, yeah?
Yeah, no, because as I was saying, in a natal chart, each planet can have so many, many different roles based on the houses it rules in the birth chart, the houses it rules in solar returns or lunar returns and things. And once we know what has happened in the life, looking back at the natal astrology at the time, yes, it's marvelous how it can give us a picture of that. But trying to show what's going to happen in the life, because there are so many options, unless we have a very, very limited context, we're not going to be able to tell which of these options is the relevant one, which roles the various planets are playing.
And what about, I wanted to mention that before, about the connection between the querent and the universe, and that moment that the astrologer is capturing to see and to give the answer.
It just seems to connect, because to start, it seems as if it's a random thing, but the moment at which the astrologer hears the question or receives the question from the querent, it's part of life. The querent asks the question at that point. And the particular astrologer who the querent has consulted is going to receive that question at that point. It's like the querent consults me, for instance. I won't get the question at 10 o'clock, so I'm taking my dog for a walk, but I'll get the question at 11 o'clock when I come home. But this is it's part of the universal pattern. And I found that absolutely remarkable, how working with horary and just really gives a wonderful perception of the connection between the world up there and the world down here in which we live, and how what's going on down here reflects the patterns of what's going on up there, as shown in the movements of the planets and stars. Wonderful thing, wonderful.
Yes, as above, so below.
Yeah, and it really is, and it's the study of astrology which led me into belief in Christianity, and very much surprised the priest when I went to the church and asked to be received into the church. He was sitting there looking through the pile of documents, looking for the relevant documents, just to make conversation while he was doing that. He said, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" "Oh, I'm an astrologer." "Oh, well, okay, well, we'll talk about that later." But he never found it necessary to do so, and it was because of that, because of doing the astrology, that I felt I needed to be accepted into the church, because it was that had made me really see the truth in it and believe in it.
And what can't be judged in horary chart, and what about silly, curious querents?
Well, no, some question that there does have to be some serious interest in the matter and the querent. It's asking a question because you happen to have read something in a newspaper, or your friend happened to mention it. No, it's not going to produce a valid chart. It doesn't have to be a life or death matter, but it needs to have some importance to you. Whether the cat comes home or when the cat's going to come home, yes, that is a very important thing. And it's something which you're going to have more importance to this particular querent, rather than things like who's going to be the next president of America. Unless you live in America, your cat coming home is more important to you than that.
That's right. In your books, you also talk a lot about aspects. And one, let's say, formula you mention says dignity of the planet indicates the power to act, receptions indicate the inclination to act, and aspects indicates the chance to act. Can you tell us something more about this?
Well, aspect, there needs to be, in most questions, there needs to be an aspect showing connection between the querent and the thing they're asking about, because most questions involve some kind of connection somehow, whether it's getting the job or getting her to go on a date with you or the cat coming home or whatever it is. There needs to be something happening. Happening is shown by an aspect. And some questions are not. If your question is simply, oh, does he really love me? Well, it doesn't need to be an aspect. You're looking just at the receptions. That can answer that question. Although if there is an aspect, it can fill out the picture rather. Yes, he does at the moment, but then he's going to realise that you vote for Donald Trump, and so he's going to realise what a horrible person you are and stop loving you. But it's
when someone asks a question that includes the event, let's say, so we need the aspect, and they have the aspect, but they don't have a reception. Can we rely on those aspects?
Well, again, depending on what the question is. If I'm asking simply, when will my cat come home? An aspect is all that's required. The reception is irrelevant. I don't need the chart to tell me that the cat loves me or that I love the cat. Obviously, I care about the cat, because I wouldn't be asking the question otherwise. And the cat probably loves his dinner more than he loves me, but he's going to come home. The aspect is all that's necessary. And as an example chart, a chart I use in my teaching, as was some time ago, one of our cats had just disappeared, not been seen for a few days, and asked the question, when is he going to come back? And I just glanced at the chart and saw there was an aspect immediately perfecting between the ruler of the 6th house, which is the cat, and my planet, which is me. As I say, I saw that immediately. And so I went to the door, opened the door to the garden, and the cat walked in. It was there. But the aspect between his planet and my planet was an opposition. But that's completely explained by me sort of swearing at him, "Where have you been, you idiot?" these days.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I knew where he had been because I could see he'd gone out and got himself beaten up, but getting into an unnecessary fight, which was part of his hobby.
Your first, I think, chart example in the textbook is "Where is my cat?"
Yes, yes. God, I can't remember what that was.
Yeah, it was presented only with the ruler of sixth house going retrograde. So I remember that. And what about your school or teaching, John? Can you tell us something more about that?
I just briefly remind me of that question in a moment. Just as you mentioned retrograde and things, a very important thing. There's again this very common idea that retrograde is a bad thing. The planet turns retrograde, it becomes either very weak or very nasty. But this is simply not so. If I take my dog for a walk, I turn retrograde and start heading back towards home. I do not become weak or nasty as soon as I turn around and start going back home. The direction in which you're traveling doesn't tell us anything. What you're traveling towards or away from can tell us things, but not simply the fact you're going back. And the idea that planets turning retrograde is bad. Well, if planets didn't turn retrograde on a regular basis, the whole system would very fast fall apart completely. We'd have no cosmos. No. It's a necessary thing. Or even a planet being in station, not moving, can be very good. And it doesn't mean the planet is necessarily weak.
It depends on the context, yeah.
Yeah, there's a very good example of this in the birth chart of a well-known American who has his Saturn, which is in station, right in the middle of the fixed Earth sign of Taurus. And in his chart, okay, a lot of people born on the same day as him, everybody had Saturn in station there. They didn't all behave in the same way. But him, what he was famous for was standing still and not running away when everybody else was running away. In the fixed Earth of Taurus, he stood like a stone wall, which is why he was called Stonewall Jackson. This very, very famous American general. This is lived out in his chart in a beautiful way, and it's not a weakness; it's a strength. So again, it depends on what's happening. If or a chart I cast for myself, because I live quite close to the river here, and the river was getting higher and higher and higher, and there had been a lot of flooding in other places on the river. And I was worried my house was going to get flooded, so I asked the question. And the significator of the river again made an immediate aspect to Saturn, which again was in station. So the Earth barrier was not going to give way. And it didn't. In other places on the river, it had given way. The Earth barrier had collapsed, but here it didn't. And it was shown by the planet being in station. I'm asking about the Earth barrier. I want it to be in station. I don't want it moving.
That's right.
Okay, so you're asking something? Oh yeah, my teaching.
Yeah.
Yes, I teach horary by correspondence course. I have the full course, and I have a brief one, Horary Light, which is just a kind of introduction for students who aren't sure if they really want to do the full course or not. And everything's done by email, just because the dialogue between the teacher and the student is a very important thing. Working together as we work our way through charts. Something I constantly impress on my students is, there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. Making mistakes is how you learn. By making mistakes in your judgment of the charts, as we work our way step by step through these judgments, you learn a lot. It's good. It seems to work well.
And what about when astrologer gives a wrong answer?
It happens. As I said before, even astrologers are not perfect human beings. We make mistakes. Sometimes I make mistakes. Things in either didn't understand the question properly, or the question was asked in such a cloudy way that you thought you got the real point of the question, but the querent hadn't actually told you the really significant thing. Sometimes people just don't want to speak about it. Usually if somebody asks me about, have I got a future in this relationship with this guy I've just met? Something I always ask them is, well, so far as you know, is there anybody else involved on either side? And sometimes the querent will say, well, no, there isn't, but knowing perfectly well that yes, there is. So sometimes they're not straightforward. As I say, you can make mistakes. And there's wonderful thing about horary is there's always more to learn. And even now I've been doing it for so many years and God knows how many charts, but it's so good that there's never a point. It's not like learning the multiplication tables. Okay, I know it all and that's all there is. There's always more. Increase your understanding as you see charts showing different examples of things. So and sometimes this means getting it wrong. It's too bad. Something I impress on clients when I'm giving my judgments to them, which I always do in writing, not speaking, because it's very important that the judgment is given in black and white. You give the judgment in speaking, the clients always just reinterpret it as they want to themselves. They hear the bits they want to hear and ignore the bits they don't want to hear. Whereas if you give it to them in writing, well, okay, this is what they said. But something I impress on it is this is my judgment of an astrological chart. I'm good at what I do, but I make no claim to infallibility. And you see this in other fields as well. Even the best footballers can miss a penalty or things like that.
That's right.
Things can
I think that I read also in your other books, especially those who are actually your courses, seminars on astrology. You were coming to Belgrade, if I'm right.
Yes, I came several times to Belgrade a long time ago. No, I like Belgrade very much. Always, whenever I got there, I insisted when they picked me up from the airport, we don't go straight to my hotel, we go straight to the Danube. I want to smell the Danube. That's a beautiful greetings to Belgrade, and smelling that beautiful river. Lovely. And the food, very nice too.
Yeah, you should visit Montenegro as well. I'm from Montenegro, and it would be also my honor to invite you to be a guest and teach and maybe be in some astrology seminars here in Montenegro.
Yes, these things rather seem to have gone out of fashion, these live events, what with, well, COVID and the rise of internet and things. Everything's now done to that, which in many ways is a pity. Actually, much more interesting lecturing to an audience of human beings rather than speaking to my computer for 2 hours. Actually see the real reactions from people. It's nice. And the different reactions, though, they're obviously appreciating it. That one over there has fallen asleep.
Yes, it's a bit traditional, let's say, nowadays when we look at it, but I like it and prefer it more than online teachings, let's say.
Yeah, no, it's very nice because I used to do so much traveling. I went quite literally all around the world on some of my trips, lecturing here and there, seeing places I would never have gone to otherwise, like Japan and things. Wow. And getting paid to go and see these places. Wow.
Yes. I mean, it has its advantages, like everything. So, John, I want to thank you on being my guest here on the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been good to do. Thank you.
And it was a pleasure to speak with you. I think that a lot of things that were, let's say, confusing for people who love horary astrology, you explained it on the right way.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Okay.